We're going through very stressful times, quite to a certain extent terrifying times, because terror terrifies. And all over the world, anti-Semitism is rearing its ugly head again in a massive way, in quantity and quality unseen for the last many years, since perhaps the Second World War. And it's quite a shock, apart from the fact the atrocity that happened on Simchas Torah really winded us, because this hasn't happened since the Holocaust, so many Yidden being killed in one day because they're Jews, basically. And this is causing trauma, shock, despair. I saw a letter from someone I know who wrote that she's been walking around for 5-6 weeks in a daze. People she knows have been killed in the army, close friends of her son, and there's no sort of life's lost its taste. It can't do anything else, can't think of anything else. And the leadership's been terrible, and this is a terrific shock to our system, and it's very, very hard to get over. Now, that's totally true. There's no question about it. It's terrible, it's awful, and it's atrocities which are atrocious and horrific. And there are reasons why some people feel more devastated than others. The main and natural reason is because people whose culture, society, the people they know, family and friends, are involved closely in what happened, whether it's people who were killed originally, whether people taken hostage, or whether soldiers fighting. If you have family and friends, you're close to them, you feel it much keener than people who have less. And the avodah, as we mentioned before in a previous clip, is to be nice of oil, to feel it, to imagine what would happen if it happened to me, because that's the avodah of imagination, to try and feel that the pain and the sorrow of the bereavement and of the fear, what will happen to family and friends and so on and so forth. That's the avodah. But it's natural that a person closer to the event feels it in a way much more intensely than someone outside it. Also, there are people of a certain neshama, which is a Yiddish neshama. They feel Klal Yisrael, they feel the nation of Klal Yisrael. And some people are like that. Some people have a certain gedula in that, and they feel it more keenly than others. But there's another point I want to make, and that is as follows. This week's Parsha, which is Parsha's Toldos, says by Yisroel Zabon Bekirbo that the twins inside Rivka, while she was pregnant with Esau and Yankov, they were fighting Bekirbo in the womb. And Chazal tell us, fighting with Nachal Shnei Lomois, they were fighting different ideas, different ideologies, different lives. They both wanted Olam Haba, Olam Hazeh, and they were fighting. One was Avodah Zarah, one was Torah, and so on. Rabbi Yerucham, in his commentary on that posuk, on that small Rashi, says as follows. He's looking around him, and he's very surprised, because in his day, which was just before the Second World War, he sees this raising anti-Semitism, raising its ugly head again, and with the same old tainas, the same old libels, vile lies that were disproved and totally shown up to be Sheker v'Chozov 60, 70 years ago. Jews poison the wells, Jews do this, Jews do that, there's a conspiracy, there's the Proctors of Elders of Zion, etc., and all that happened in Nazi Germany, Yimach Shemon B'Zichron, and Poland, the rise of anti-Semitism, the Jews. And he says he doesn't understand. People have advanced. Nations are more enlightened, more civilized. And they know that this is primitive thinking, savage, primal feelings of whatever it is, of hating the alien, being jealous, whatever one explains anti-Semitism. So, you've done it, you've been there. So aren't you ashamed to say it all over again? Aren't you ashamed to be so primitive? And he answers, no. You see from here that it's a chok. It's part of nature. It's part of the very fabric, the very being of the fabric of the being of the world is the Esau, Soni, Yaakov. This is what is going to happen, should happen, and will happen. And therefore, the whole of Jewish history is encapsulated in Vayisroel Zabon Bekirbo, what was happening to Rivka inside the womb. And it's not just Jewish history, it's world history. Because that's what it's all about. Esau versus Yaakov. It will get it'll settle down. There'll be quieter periods, there'll be noisier periods, and so on and so forth. There'll be quieter times, but it'll be a cycle. And every 70 years, 50 years, every 100 years, it'll come up again, and there'll be quiet, we will live comfortably, and so on. And that's what people are feeling now. People are feeling scared, people are feeling anti-Semitism is on the rise, I'm not as comfortable with my neighbors I used to be looking at non-Jews. There's so many of them. There's so many Arabs in America and in England and in France, and there's so many Jew haters all over the place. Look what's happening. I don't feel comfortable in my own country anymore, and so on and so forth. But I have to make a powerful and choshev point, but it's only part of a problem and a question. You see, we're going to have, Be'ez Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu bring Yeshua b'Mheiro. What will happen is they will be mooted a day of Avelis to create a national mourning day, as other nations do, and the Israeli government will be asked to do that, and maybe the Rabbanut will join in, etc., and that will be a day of national mourning. And then, of course, there will be a question, will the Haredim join in? And if they don't, they'll be accused of separatism or of not caring about people dying and so on, which is ridiculous, but that's what they'll be accused of, and living in their own little world and not being part of everyone else and lacking achdus and other tainas generally phone Haredim. I'm not going to go into the actual point. We're going to be talking about this in another clip, but the point I do want to make is as follows. There is definitely a psychological point, and it goes like this. It's a powerful point and an emistical point. It's one point out of many, much more complex issue, but one point out of many. And the point goes like this. Secular Zionism, creating the state of Israel to resolve the problem of anti-Semitism, which didn't actually work, but that's what it was, the goal was, has something they've done to the narrative of Jews, and that is we've created a new Jew. And to a certain extent, history begins with the Holocaust. Real history or meaningful history begins with the Holocaust. Yes, of course, we're a nation going back, etc., but that's not the real stuff, because we've now got a new Jew post-Holocaust, and therefore the only thing that is really important and really matters is what happened after the Holocaust, and to a certain extent what happens in the state of Israel, and therefore every crisis is tremendous, it's existential, all the Jews are going to suffer, etc., and it's horrible, it's the worst thing that ever happened. There's also a tier, by the way, in brackets, for people to enjoy being in the headlines, and therefore to always suggest that whatever's happening at the present time is the worst, the best, the greatest, etc., because otherwise you can't really experience it anymore. If it isn't the worst, the best, and the greatest, if it's just basically normal, you can't really feel anything anymore. But take away the brackets, go back to what we just said. So what they've done is they've created this idea, cut people off from the real narrative. Now, if you do that, then it is awful, and it's tremendously awful, and it's horrible, it's atrocious, it's impossible, and it causes despair. We cannot live amongst the nations. It doesn't seem to work, whatever we do, whether we're part of them, whether we're their own state. They want to kill us, they want to destroy us, they don't want us in their country, they do, etc., and it's confusing, it's traumatizing, and the very thing that happened is horrible, 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 and unbearable. But if you are joined onto the Jewish narrative, but in a living way, think about it. A secular Zionist does not learn Chumash, definitely not every year, and definitely not thinking Yaakov Avinu was his great-great-grandfather, and Esau was the villain, but you live it. A Cheder kid lives that, and you live it all your life. When you go to Shul every Shabbat here, you live Esau and Yaakov. Yaakov is my great-great-great-great-grandfather. And it's not just from biblical history, go to the second Beis Hamikdash, the first Beis Hamikdash, the second Beis Hamikdash, go through the Crusades. We learn in yeshivas, we learn Rishonim who were slaughtered al Kiddush Hashem. We live Rabbi Akiva was slaughtered al Kiddush Hashem. You've got the Shach, we learn a Shach who suffered through the Gzeras, etc. In the 1600s, it said the Shach suffered terribly, etc. And we learn him, and we associate and identify and affinitize ourselves with him. We have this sense of history which gives us a certain perspective. True, from the Holocaust till nowadays, there was never such a bad day. But before the Holocaust, there definitely was. Whether it's the Chorban Beis Hamikdash, which was worse, whether it's the Cossacks, and don't think that this was torture compared to what the Cossacks did, or the Crusaders, or the Inquisitions, etc., etc. We've got a very, very, very long history of being beaten and tortured and murdered, and in our thousands and in our millions. If you do not relate to your own history, and the only thing that's relevant is post-Holocaust and State of Israel, then everything becomes unbearable, it becomes enlarged, because this is all you have. If you do relate to history, I'm not taking away, chas v'sholom, the tsar, I'm not taking away the hardship and the bereavement and the shock and the trauma, and it's unbelievably harsh, and we cry the whole time. But I've got a kli to put it in perspective. This is another thing in the events of Klal Yisrael. This is it because the Mashiach, okay? And it's part of what we've been going on for years and years and years and years and years. And that gives me the koyach to be sorry to continue and not despair and not give up and not be a knockout blow. Winded, yes, but not knocked out. As I always say, as a 60-year-old man, I'm frustrated. I give up on the world. Look what's happening. But as a 2,000-year-old Jew, I'm used to it. Have a good Shabbos.